morning, everyone, alumni, faculty, staff, everyone who's here. Welcome to what we're billing as a virtual farewell conversation between Provost Kotlikoff and Cornell Engineering Dean Lance Collins. My name is Chris Dawson. I work in the communications office of the college. And before we start, I want to let you know that time permitting, Dean Collins will be fielding some audience questions that flow from the conversation. But again, time permitting. If you have a question closer to the end of the hour, submit it through the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Okay, we're not going to be looking through the chat. So if you have questions, use the Q&A. Thank you all for coming, as I said, and let's just get things started. Here is Cornell University Provost Michael Kotlikoff.
Thanks very much, Chris. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, or whatever time zone you're in. Let me just start by expressing the absolute pleasure that it's been working with Lance, first as a fellow dean and then more recently as provost, as well as my admiration for what Lance has accomplished at Cornell. He is an extraordinarily perceptive and thoughtful leader. He works at a strategic level, always asking tough questions about broader goals and priorities. He's used this attribute to identify and pursue key strategic priorities for the College of Engineering, developing differentiators for Cornell engineering that are acknowledged around the country. These include, but aren't limited to, innovations in teaching, key research focuses of the college in energy, bioengineering, and materials, and successful efforts to diversify the faculty and student body. So I'm delighted to conduct this interview with you, Lance, which allows you to reflect on your 10 years of engineering leadership at Cornell.
10 years.
10 years just of leadership. It seems like yesterday, doesn't it?
Well, no, I'm not so sure. We can look at before and after pictures, and I think you'll note a few more gray hairs.
Both of us. Lance, you've been among Cornell's leaders on sustainability, both in terms of our campus operations and in terms of research with applications far beyond the college and the campus. In particular, you've led the investigation of earth source heat as a potential way of heating the campus without carbon and allowing us to meet our 2035 goal of carbon-free campus. Where are we now in that investigation? Does it seem promising, or do we need to focus sustainability efforts elsewhere?
So first, I'd like to say Cornell should feel extraordinarily proud for what it has accomplished in the area of sustainability. I think we work so hard at it, we have our heads down, that we often don't take a moment to actually celebrate and think about the achievements that we've made. We're recognized across the country and across the world as one of the leading campuses as far as sustainability is concerned. We walk the talk. It's not just fancy words, but in fact hard work. And it's a collaboration that really expands across the entire campus. It's an extraordinary facilities group. It's faculty that are very industrious about this. It's students that never allow us to take our eye off of the ball. So it's really an incredible community-wide effort. I think we're making extraordinary progress. I mean, this is a little bit of that Cornell aspect of us that we're never quite satisfied. So everyone wishes that it were faster and so forth. But we're in the, we've sort of done a lot of planning work in terms of earth source heat. I do think the notion of taking energy off of the grid is the right notion, that I do believe that it's not really sustainable in any cold climate to say you're gonna draw all of your energy from renewable sources like solar energy, and then saying that the entire weight of heating in a cold climate can be handled that way. It's unstable, it's an intermittent source. And so creating a stable source of energy is the right way to go. And deep geothermal would do that. And I think it's also exciting because there aren't a lot of other projects that have the technical capabilities that we have to actually bring this thing to fruition. And so it's really one of those places where we're really pretty far out in front. And I think a problem, not just at Cornell, it's one thing to, solve a problem on the campus, but in some sense, we believe there's an opportunity to start a new industry based on deep geothermal energy. So I think there's, a lot of reason to be excited and optimistic about the outcome.
And Lance, you and I have talked about making sure that this effort is itself sustainable, right? That it extends beyond your leadership. And I know you feel confident that Lyndon Archer, who also has great interests in this area, is prepared to continue this effort, and the partnerships that you've built with individuals and facilities is itself one that will continue to bear fruit.
Exactly. So I'm delighted that Lyndon is equally excited about this project and equally excited about Cornell's commitment to achieve carbon neutrality. And he brings a lot to the table. He is an energy person. His research area, in particular around batteries, he's one of the leading people in the world as far as that's concerned. So he's got technical depth in this area, but he also has passion, and he really wants to see us achieve these goals. And you pointed out facilities, because I really do think this is, in some sense, the kind of hidden asset at Cornell is that our facilities group is incredible and really at the frontier as far as these bringing new technologies on board. And that's not always the case. Culturally, facilities people are typically only blamed when things don't work, right? They're not celebrated when things do work. They're blamed when things don't work. So that breeds a kind of conservatism. They are often reluctant to try something new because it adds risk, and risk is a thing that, as I say, that often that's where things where the blame kind of gets assessed. Really, we all should take credit, because I think the institution as a whole does not view things in this way, and in some sense has been a leader as far as advancing technologies. And so if we think about lake source cooling, which was now maybe 2 decades back, that was when Freon we were no longer allowed to use Freon as a refrigerant, and we needed to switch. It was the easy thing to do was to switch from Freon to another closely related molecule and keep on chugging. That's what most campuses did. We went about creating the Lake Source Cooling Project, which was a really, again, a much higher risk but higher reward project. And we did it at utility scale. The entire campus is cooled using cold lake water from Lake Cayuga and a little bit of the town, a couple of buildings in town. Again, this was really not the straightforward solution, but it was, and the stretch solution that was done then. And in some sense, I feel confident we can get there, even though, I'll be honest, getting heat out of the ground is harder than getting cooling from a source like water. But nevertheless, I feel confident that we can get there, largely because they provide the ability to implement a complex project. And we have fantastic faculty support on this as well. At the helm is Jeff Tester, who's a world expert as far as geothermal energy is concerned. Our geologists in earth and atmospheric sciences have been providing important consulting work around making sure that we do this in a safe way to make sure that we're not stimulating activity, earthquakes and so forth. And so so that's where there's just been a lot of background work. You don't see the drilling quite yet, but there's been a lot of work to make sure that we're doing it in a proper and safe way.
Great, and I might add that many of the individuals in facilities are benefited from their education in the College of Engineering and have brought that skill set to their efforts.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Right. So these are some of ours. Yeah, we'll take credit for that as well.
yep.
Sure.
Lance, in your final semester at Cornell, you were hit, as all of us have been, by an unprecedented crisis. What are your thoughts on leading the college through that crisis? What has been the process of change like? And do you see lasting effects of this experience on the future of the College of Engineering and on engineering education in general?
So it really has been challenging. I think I had in my head a mental model about the last few months of my time as dean that didn't quite pan out. I thought I would be taking it a little bit easier and doing nice sort of farewell events and so forth. Instead, it's actually been real nose to the grindstone, and I give a lot of credit to the senior leadership of the university putting a lot of hard work together to think about how we can operate in this really difficult situation in a pandemic in a safe way. We want to bring students back, but only under the circumstances that we can ensure that they will be safe when they arrive, and that we will be safe as a community when they arrive. And so that's been an incredibly challenging thing. I'm very proud of the work. I was part of one of the planning teams that was looking at the reactivation. And I'm very proud of the work that was done. It was sort of no nonsense. It was done in a 6-week-ish period of time. I can say that I was being pushed about as hard as I could be, and rightly, in my opinion, because we really wanted to understand all of the elements. There's been, we're looking at the modeling of how the disease spreads, the epidemiology of the disease, and understanding in the Cornell context, what are the risks and how do we mitigate those risks? That was a very, very challenging thing to be done, and it was done quickly, but it was done accurately, and it was with the best understanding that we have as far as the actual spread of the virus is concerned. So it was really, really extraordinary. So in terms of things that I think will have a lasting impact, as you know, we all as an institution, not only Cornell, but really all of the higher ed institutions across the country, in very short order converted from traditional residential instruction to online instruction in just a matter of either days, or for us it was 3 weeks. I think that's going to lead to lasting change. What I would say, the tools that allowed us to do that, the tools like the one we're using right now, the Zoom, to allow meetings, was effective in some sense for representing the traditional lecture, which is one in which there's primarily one person speaking to a group. So the tools are really in place. I'm not sure that that's enough. I think that in some sense there's room for expansion and growth of these tools. And I think that now that higher ed has undergone this transition, there'll be a bigger motivation for the sort of next gen of these tools in sort of education, and especially in the higher ed context. The way I think of it in sort of simplistic terms is, if you think about social networking tools, which are much more sort of informal and allowing for kind of interactions on a less structured way, if those could be integrated with the tools that exist today, I think there really could be much stronger platforms for education. So I think that what I would say is the experiment was remarkable. It worked better. It was terrifying, frankly, to think about doing it in such short order. It worked remarkably well, and I think we all came out of it thinking, wow, that there really is something. I think faculty are now thinking differently about how to return, even as residential instruction does return. It's going to return in stages. But even as it does, there will be a recognition that, well, I now have 2 modes, and I can think about what I can deliver mode 1 and what I can deliver mode 2. And maybe I don't want to just deliver residential instructions the way that I did before. So having gone through the learning curve allows you to think about things differently. But as I say, I'm not convinced that these tools are not going to advance. I think now there's also a larger market, and if you're an entrepreneurial sort of person, you're going to recognize there's the chance to do something better. And I think there's a lot of headroom for improvement of those tools. So I'm excited to see where they go and seeing if they can advance. And even places like Cornell could play a role as far as that's concerned, is with the new entrepreneurial spirit, both on the main campus and at Cornell Tech. I think there's it would be an interesting thing to be those that are so inclined to be thinking about. Mike, I think you, yeah.
Thank you. That's great, Lance. And let me take this opportunity just to highlight for faculty and the alumni and staff of the engineering college how critical a role engineering faculty played in the epidemiology modeling that you're referring to. So faculty in operations research were absolutely essential in guiding our thinking about how to reactivate the campus. So more to come on that, but I do want to have a tremendous shout out to Peter Frazier and his lab, David Schmoys, and others who really were essential in guiding the institution. So you mentioned Cornell Tech, Lance. Let's just talk a little bit about Cornell Tech. You were a key part of the leadership team whose proposal won Mayor Bloomberg's 2011 competition, which enabled us to launch the new graduate school in New York City on Roosevelt Island. Today, Cornell Tech has a state-of-the-art, highly sustainable campus, 400 students, 8 graduate degree programs. It has so far enabled the founding of 60 startups, and it's doing outreach to New York City's K through 12 students and teachers. Could you reminisce a little bit about the early days with you and Kent and Dan creating the proposal and taking those first steps to invent a new graduate school from scratch?
Yeah, that was an amazing year, literally almost to the day, a kind of crazy calendar year that started 6 months into my term. So, I was appointed Dean of Engineering on July 1st of 2010, and Mayor Bloomberg, or the Economic Development Corporation, announced the competition. It was in sort of the second or third week of December of 2010. And there are some early movement that the university made that really was extraordinary. So I recall that I received a phone call from Kent Fox, who was provost at the time, and he just called me up and said to me, "I'm forwarding something to you. Clear your calendar. We are meeting all day today." And I said, "Really? What is this about?" He goes, "You're not going to believe it, but there's a competition to build a new campus in New York City, and we are all in as far as that is concerned." So Dan Huttenlocker got the next call. I'm not sure what the order was, but Dan was next. And then Kathy Dove, who at the time was my associate dean for administration. So the four of us sat together and stared at the original announcement. And the original announcement foreshadowed the dogfight that we were about to enter into, because in the original announcement, it said something to the effect that we in New York City are acknowledging the growth of this burgeoning tech sector, and we want to see it advance. And we've seen in models across the country, like the one with Stanford in Silicon Valley and the one with MIT in Boston has done, and we would love to see something like that in New York. So 2 of our competitors were explicitly written into the announcement, which obviously is not the ideal situation in which to enter a competition in which your competitor is featured in the announcement. So we were already feeling a little bit behind, even before anything had gotten started. So we started to just kind of, sort of crazy brainstorming even about what was it that they were offering. So they were offering land. It was a land grant. I mean, it was really, in some ways, and we were saying, we're the land grant institution, so there's a natural connection there. And there was $100 million. And at first that sounded like a lot of money. And then we really started to think carefully about the cost of construction in New York City and realized, okay, that's not building the building for us, that's for sure. And so we're gonna really need to do some serious fundraising, et cetera. So there was this kind of open-ended brainstorming. But what was really, there were certain facets of it that I think were telling right from the beginning. One was Ken Fox was all in right from the beginning. And if you're as you know, sitting in the provost chair, you own the responsibility of something like this. And both Dan and I were saying, boy, there are lots of elements of risk. And Kent was always, sort of foot on the accelerator. No, we've got to have this. This is something we've got to do. That's very helpful because as that stayed that way all the way through. So you sort of know that the institution is behind it. It really helped. The other challenging thing was that we spent essentially a calendar year out of our normal jobs, or it's certainly not at the level that we should, that you'd expect. Because I think almost every week I was on the bus to New York City. We were meeting with so many different groups and wanting to champion our cause. And we needed to do that because the main competitor for the site that we identified as our primary site, which is where it is, southern end of Roosevelt Island, was Stanford. And Stanford, as I said, was named in the original announcement and was really pushing very hard to take the Roosevelt Island site. So that started off as a year-long endeavor, a year-long competition. I can say that we each demonstrated institutional strengths. So the institutional strength at Stanford is that at Stanford, it had incredible brand power. I came to realize and understand quickly what that meant. It meant that John Hennessy, the president at the time, was being interviewed on CNN and all of the major newspapers, et cetera, on a regular basis because of there was just such a sort of sense of excitement for the notion that Stanford was coming to New York City. And I recall our a little quiet celebration when the Ithaca Journal featured us, and we thought, okay, well, all right, we're off to the races. But what came across over that full year was we were a team. And I think that what I have always marveled at Cornell is our teamwork. We are collaborative by nature. We are low ego. Everyone was pitching in the ways that they could to continue to strengthen our case. As I said, we did a lot of brainstorming with people in the city, and over time, we started to build momentum. And it was this thing where, each couple of weeks, each few weeks, we could feel a little bit more. We made an incredibly smart move in picking up the Technion as a partner, and that was extraordinary because they came with such high credentials in the entrepreneurship space. So then we were, strengthened by that. And also we were international, which I think was an interesting thing, to bring an international university to the US, and one with such an incredible track record in entrepreneurship as well, which is what this thing was all about. So they were terrific partners. And then we just headed into the fall with a sort of dogged pursuit. And I still remember the phone call I received from Kathy Dove that was a moment that I think I'll always remember, because Kathy, who was not ever short on words, was almost speechless as she whispered into the phone. It took me about 3 or 4 times before I could actually hear what she had said when she was telling me basically Stanford had withdrawn from the competition and that Cornell was now going to have Cornell Tech. An incredibly proud moment for me. So I am noticing that I don't know if we lost the connection with Mike.
It looks like maybe we did. In the meantime, we've had a few questions come in from some of the participants who are home watching, so might be a good use of some of the time
Sure.
here. All right.
Let's do it.
So one is more of a comment. I think as you move on to Virginia Tech, will you still wish to be available to Cornell alumni engineers? I am Jose Ramos and I live in Virginia. Welcome to your new home state.
So will I be available to, say it again?
To Cornell engineering alumni.
Of course.
Of course.
So Cornell is deeply part of it. Like this is not a thing that ends, on July 1. I have, always have a part of me will be connected to Cornell. And I, look forward to continuing relationships with Cornellians and that are in the Northern Virginia or the greater DC area. I will sort of proudly be schizophrenic and have dual allegiances, but just to the point of is Cornell sort of part of me? It is a permanent part of me, and it's a incredible. In terms of what happened with my career here, it's really, really exceptional. I came as a faculty member and thought that that's what I would be doing, and never imagined that I would have all of the opportunity that I have had, both as a department chair and as a dean. So that's a part of me. So we will have a beer together when I get there.
Lance, I'm really sorry. My computer rebooted in the middle of this, so I'm back. Let's continue.
Okay, great, terrific.
So something that not everybody knows about Lance is that he is affectionately known within Cornell's leadership as Mr. L Train because of your critical work with the city at a key point in time a few years ago. And I wonder if you just talk a little bit about that experience and how you think Cornell engineering has had this impact in the state and the broader implications for our land grant mission, what we do for the state, and how engineering is part of that.
It was another extraordinary moment that started with I was actually in New York City at the time and was making opening remarks to celebrate a collaboration between the College of Engineering and the Hospital for Special Surgery, which is the best, if you ever need anything done with a shoulder or a knee, it's the place to go in the world for that work. And there's been this wonderful collaboration between the Hospital for Special Surgery and Cornell Engineering, which is what keeps them at the sort of forefront of their field. And so it was celebrating 40 years, and I was there to make some opening remarks. And as I was, in the sort of minutes before I was to step on the stage, my phone was buzzing, and I sort of, hit the off button, and then it started buzzing again. And I started to get, that's always an alarming feeling. All of us that are in administrative positions will know that when you kind of, someone has really got to get to you, you always worry. You don't know what it is. There are lots of possibilities that could be fairly unpleasant. And so, so I'm sitting there kind of really feeling a lot of anxiety about it. And, but anyway, I get through my opening remarks and I sort of scoot out of the room. And it was the governor's office saying that the governor would like a word with me, Governor Cuomo. And so, at first I literally thought this is one of my friends, my college friends that are fooling me. And so I started to think about who is this? And so no, this this is Governor Cuomo's office. The governor would like to speak to you in an hour, something on that order. And so an hour later, in his, well-defined, distinctive voice, I hear Governor Cuomo on the phone. It's no question, this is not a friend of mine, because it was him. And he is saying that he has got a problem and that he would like the help of Cornell Engineering. And it had to do with the L train, which is one of the subway lines that connects the northern side of Brooklyn and Manhattan. And it sort of goes with a tunnel that goes under the East River. And so the tunnel had been damaged during Hurricane Sandy. And he was looking for help in refurbishing the tunnel. The tunnel had been kind of operating, frankly, on fumes, and it was very possible that a train would get stuck because a lot of the electrical wiring had been damaged, and it was salt water that had filled the tunnel. And as you might imagine, salt water and electronics don't really go together very well. So they were looking to do a full renovation of the tunnel, and had a plan. And that plan was to start in, I think it's, if I've got the years right, I guess it would have been April of 2019. And so they were planning to close the tunnel and the line for 15 months. And if you look on a map and just look at, sort of northern Brooklyn is an up and coming part of Brooklyn, and it had no other subway lines anywhere near, you're probably a mile and a half from the next adjacent subway line further south. And so there really would have been a group of people that would have been stranded, from Manhattan, and a lot of the jobs were in Manhattan. And so it really was hurting the community. Especially the Brooklyn side of the subway line. And so the governor was feeling the pressure of that. There was a mounting pressure as this was December of 2018. This was December before. And so he wanted to see, is there any way that repairs could be done in such a way that the line did not have to be completely shut down as it was planned to be. So he approached me, and I got a colleague who's really one of the leading tunnel experts in the world, Tom O'Rourke, who is a professor in civil and environmental engineering. And we were the Cornell half of the team. And then he made a similar phone call to Mary Boyce, who's the dean of engineering at Columbia. And then she engaged 3 of her colleagues. And so we formed a little team. And this is, we're talking around mid-December of 2018. And so the little team was invited to presentations by the MTA to really talk through in more technical detail what the issues were. And so we went in, and it was, I think the meeting started at 11:30 p.m. or something like that. It was timed because they shut down lines in the middle of the night. And so we spent maybe a couple of hours being briefed. So, so it was like maybe 1 o'clock in the morning or 1:30 in the morning when we went on a tour. And we actually went down into the subway to actually physically see what had happened, the damage that had happened, and what their plans were going to be. And interestingly, the tour was led by Governor Cuomo, who is extraordinary in the sense that he had a lot of technical detail and understanding. There's a group of engineers that are there who are ready to, take over, but he insists that he gives the tour, and he is spot on. He knows exactly what's going on. It was really impressive to see him. The one interesting thing was we all had to wear a hard hat with one exception. So the governor refused to put on a hard hat, and nobody seemed to have the gumption to try to force the issue. There was a clear understanding of who's in charge that stayed clear all the way through the project. But anyway, so we got our briefing, and then we spent the next, sort of 3 to 4 weeks every day, hours on the phone, working with the MTA and the consulting firms that were working on the project, to think about other ways in which the project could be accomplished. So the goal had to, and the standards had to be reached, but was there another way? And it turns out there was. And sort of the primary thing that we changed is that there's a thing called bench wall, which is where the wires were run. 100 years ago, that's how you protected wires from fire. And that's one of the concerns you have in a tunnel, is if there's a fire, you know, what happens to the electrical system. And so modern cabling would allow you to not have to replace it inside of the bench wall. So we started there and said, you know, no, you're just gonna leave what's there and then just hang these on racks, hang the cabling on racks. That's actually better on lots of levels, because if you need to replace a cable, it's also easier to do maintenance work. It's less expensive. And of course, these things the technology is always evolving. So, you know, sometimes you're swapping out what was, you know, sort of copper cabling at one point for fiber optic cabling later on. We also said there's a lot of modern technology for monitoring. So we were able to introduce fiber optic monitoring into the tunnel. The great news, I got a phone call out of the blue from one of the lead engineers on the project. This was a couple of months ago, saying to me that the project was finished. So it was what was supposed to be 15 months with, you know, closing down the entire line, was completed in 12 months while the line was operating. They did the work nights and weekends. You know, so it was a much better outcome for New Yorkers. It was, the entire experience of working with the governor is something that is burned in my brain. I'll never forget it. He's such a character. He's very, very funny. He's very, very directive. So I'll just finish by saying my family has fallen in love with Governor Cuomo. I don't have we get together. I have a sister and two brothers that are older than me. And we get together, you know, we sort of have little meetings like this about once a month. And every one of those meetings, they go, oh, that Governor Cuomo, he's such a strong leader. I can't wait for his briefings. He's just fabulous. He's fantastic. And it always brings a smile to my face, because that same quality of his, which of course in the pandemic was extraordinary, right? He was just a powerful voice, almost in some sense a national voice, was, you know, when you're on the business end of that very same personality trait, it's a little different. You know, he can be quite demanding, and really doesn't know that you you don't have a lot of options. You know, if he tells you what you're going to do, you've got to do it. I can still remember my assistant, Debbie Guisado, calling me and saying, you've got to be on the phone with him in 5 minutes. And Debbie was not fooling around, because she understood, you know, the consequences. If I didn't make it back, I was literally running across campus to get to the phone so that I could have a conversation with the governor. Anyway, it was a pleasure. It was really quite an exceptional thing, and I enjoyed it. And Tom O'Rourke and I became really close friends from the experience.
Well, I'll also say that having interacted with the governor a few times, your family's appreciation of the governor mirrors his appreciation for you, because he definitely credits you for your leadership in that whole endeavor. And I also understand what you're saying. The governor does not necessarily recognize that you have a full-time job, or perhaps more than a full-time job. But Lance, I want to turn now to issues of
Okay, I'm not getting the audio here.
Yep, it looks like possibly the provost has frozen. Is it okay to field another question then, Lance?
Sure.
Okay. So Ken Berman asks, Lance, I've really liked your vision for entrepreneurialism, focusing on the Ithaca and upstate region. Do you think we, Cornell, have a sufficient incubator structure for startups that might need various forms of help?
That's a great question. Ken's a great colleague. Thank you, Ken. I think we're getting there. What I would say is the appetite for entrepreneurial activity outstrips the facilities that we have, but we've come a long way. If one considers that, we've opened the eHub, for example, entrepreneurship. That's not just College of Engineering. That's across the whole university, and that has been, a real outlet for a lot of activities particularly at the undergraduate level. I'm proud of our commercialization fellow program, which provides programming at the PhD level. And I think Master of Engineering students have similar sorts of opportunities. So I think we've come a long way. Now, in terms of incubator, that's been a challenge. And so we have the McGovern Center that's really associated with biological type companies, companies that are in sort of life science, the life science space. And we have now the facilities in Duffield Hall, which are more kind of physical science engineering kind of company spaces. So we're expanding, but as I say, it's really tricky because pretty much you build it and it's full. And I think it's such an important part of the economy everywhere, not just in New York City, that I hope that and expect that we will continue to expand those facilities and opportunities. It's not necessarily just on campus. I know everyone likes things to be right adjacent to them, but we can look at other, of course, near the airport there are facilities that are there and so forth. So I think, collectively, comprehensively, we can get there. But I would say we're not quite where we need to be.
Lance, again, I really apologize. My computer again blanked out, so I've called in. Let me just ask you, I was about to turn to the issues of gender and racial diversity racial and ethnic diversity in the College of Engineering. You've mentioned previously that you regard as one of your greatest accomplishments as dean the achievement of gender parity in the undergraduate education program. The percentage of women among engineering undergrads rose from 34% in 2010 when you started to 50% in 2019, 2020, compared to a national average of 23%. Our male and female students are achieving now the same average GPA in engineering and the same 5-year graduation rate. Would you take a moment to reflect on how that parity was accomplished, what it means for the long term in engineering and the engineering workforce?
Yeah, this is extraordinarily important to me. I think that, all engineers of my generation will look back at their own education and remark about, the very, very small numbers of both minorities and women in engineering in those days. And so that, even when I just starting out there as a student, I couldn't even fathom the notion that a modern College of Engineering could achieve equality between men and women in my lifetime. Like, it really didn't seem like that was possible. So it is something I'm very proud of. And I think it just changed the narrative, because I think when things are biased, as they are in the national scene, where one in five is a woman, and you sort of get to the place where it's 1 in 1, it completely changes the narrative. So there are lots of misconceptions out there that women tend to be drawn to doing this and not that and so forth. And those things, as you approach parity, you realize, no, they're intrinsic, people have intrinsic interests, and the reason women might have been drawn to certain kinds of projects that had a more sort of social outcome associated with it, in part was because that was where they felt they were welcomed. You know, so in a situation where there are, you know, prevailing winds and tendencies like that, then you tend to, you know, there's a drift, but the drift is not necessarily personal and intrinsic. It's just the drift of the program or of society in some sense. So we get to run an experiment that others can't, and that's a powerful thing. And we're seeing the outcomes of that, which is empowered women in engineering who are going to go and change the profession. So it's something that I think is a piece of my legacy. It is my proudest part of my legacy at Cornell, and I think it will continue on with the terrific leadership that Lyndon brings. I see that as only continuing. I just wanted to take a moment though, and also note that we've made really tremendous strides as far as underrepresented minorities go. And we're at the, you know, we've close to doubled the percentage at, you know, the college percentage is at 19%. And I think it started at around 10 when I started as dean. And it's similar, that you're seeing a similar kind of sense that that everyone feels like they're ready for prime time in a not so easy environment. It's a challenging environment that we have at Cornell. Cornell is no nonsense. I have to tell that to everybody. But our students are thriving, and they're thriving in all of the, you know, the disciplines. Now, you know, there are tendencies. They tend to be in some more here than there, but all boats rise in a rising tide is the way I look at it. And I'm very proud of the fact that our freshman class is 25% underrepresented minority, an all-time high, and really this is game-changing stuff, because you're changing who is getting access, but it's also that when you change who is getting access, you improve the outcomes, because diverse teams bring more ideas to the table, and there's a healthy, thriving sense to the whole college as a consequence of these changes. So I think it's very powerful, and I think it will continue under the leadership of Lyndon Archer.
Thanks, Lance. On that last point, I wonder if you'd reflect a little bit on your role model stature within the college, both in achieving these increases, dramatic increases in diversity in engineering, and how you feel about that, how your experiences coming up in a far less diverse engineering environment, and how you think that impacts your ability to succeed in this way.
So if I sort of reflect back, you know, over the years, whatever I've been able to achieve, I owe a lot to an incredible set of mentors over time. And so if I think back to, so I did my undergraduate work at Princeton University and graduated in 1981, and just discovered many years down the road that the very first African-American to get a degree in chemical, my degree is in chemical engineering. The very first African-American to get a degree in chemical engineering at Princeton graduated only a year ahead of me, was in 1980. And his name is Cato Lorenzen. And Cato has had a spectacular career. He is one of the most known bioengineers in the world. He's a member of both the National Academy of Engineering and the National Academy of Medicine. Has made seminal contributions, and in fact invented whole new areas that integrate engineering and life science in really extraordinary and creative ways. Cato and I have known each other right from the outset as a you know, when I was, you know, just as that person that was a year ahead of me that gave me advice on classes and instructors and all of those sorts of things in the early days. And he continues to be an important colleague in my life, even to this day. He's someone I consult all of the time around the issues that we finished with, in terms of, how do we change and expand the opportunities broadly across the nation. Now it's our view is a little wider than it was when we were students. But I also want to take this moment, Mike, to add another sort of perspective that I have, and that is that at a lot of the stages as I was going through school, as I said, I was only a group. There were three of us in my three African Americans in my class, in class of '81. So we were the second, third, and fourth to get an undergraduate degree. I went on to graduate school at the University of Pennsylvania, and it turns out that I was the first African American to get a PhD in the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences at Penn. In fact, there's an award in my name in recognition of that gets that is given to high-performing PhD students to this day. I refer to this as the accident of birth. I was born at a time when the world was just awakening to this possibility, and I happened to have the right sort of math, science type skills, and I happened to be sort of coming along at that time. But as I said, it's really an accident of birth. But what's interesting is then you can't always look for the mentors that look like you. And so I also want to recognize that I've had phenomenal mentorship from people who don't look like me. And I want to give recognize two Cornellian mentors that have been phenomenally important to me. So Ken Fox, who was the person that installed me as the director of the Sibley School of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering when he was dean, and then as dean when he was provost. And I had that reporting relationship for maybe 7 or 8 years over all of that time. And he was a tremendous mentor in terms of teaching me what I needed to know to understand what it means to be a top flight administrator. He had an exceptional record of his own, and he was so open in sharing his knowledge and so humble about it. It was always amusing to me, the conversations, because he never wanted to sound like he was an expert. He always was clear that, hey, it's your decision, but here's how I would think about this particular problem. And I can tell you, I learned an immense amount from him. And the other one is another Cornellian that all of the, certainly alumni will know well. That's Pete Meinig, who was just an incredible influence on me for the final year, 5 years of his life, let's say, that he and I sort of stumbled upon each other. And of course, this is perhaps, arguably, certainly among the most influential Cornell alumni, period, full stop. And he just was someone who was just, again, so generous and willing to sit and talk through so many different things. And I can say a lot of what I could accomplish, not the least of which, of course, was that, that he put his own name and his own stamp on biomedical engineering. But in so many other ways, beyond just that, was instrumental in me understanding what it meant to be a leader at a top institution. And he was a very no-nonsense individual and held very high standards, and was free to let me know when he felt I wasn't meeting those standards. I mean, it wasn't always sort of a warm and fuzzy kind of thing, but it was exceptional in terms of helping me to improve as a dean.
Well, that's fabulous, Lance, and I think it speaks of your own humility that you would deflect that question to the individuals that were important to you in your career. We only have a couple minutes left. I wonder if there's one question we could take from the audience to give alumni or faculty a chance here. Any quick questions that have come up, Chris, over this period of time?
Yes, well, we've fielded a few in your absence when you popped out. I have one that might be a good note to end on, and then just leave it to you, Lance, to say what you feel like after that in the final couple minutes. This is from Enrique Villa. He says, Enrique Villa here from Puerto Rico. Thank you so much for your leadership and your vision during your tenure. Fun question for you. How long do you think it will take for you to remember to not say Cornell every time you go to say Virginia Tech?
That's a great question. You know, it's really funny because I think that's true of everybody that's changed institutions and has been in a sort of public place in the institution, because you're always speaking about the institution that you then have to, you know, and there's a little bit of stumbling that can happen. But I will be transitioning into a proud Virginia Tech Hokie and joining the organization. And I will have to sort of rigorously be careful about saying the correct institution in the correct places. And so I will work hard at that. But some transition, but I think, you know, I guess what I'll do is sort of use that to say, use this as an opportunity to say, I am incredibly proud to have been a Cornellian and to have served in the roles that I have served in. And so yes, as Dean, which is what we're talking about and celebrating right now, but also as the former director of the Sibley School of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering, my wonderful colleagues there. All of the interactions that I have had, all of the collegiality of this place, the humility of this place, and the exceptionalism of this place. It's rare to have that combination of really the brightest minds, and you know, I can, you know, my area is fluid mechanics, and I think the brightest minds are right here at Cornell, and we can talk about a lot of different areas in which one would come to the same conclusion. But again, that low bar of entry to go and knock at a door, to talk to somebody, that people are, even if you're asking what may be, you know, elementary questions, they're very respectful. I can tell you that even when I first got my offer to come to Cornell, I was at Penn State transitioning to Cornell, and I just didn't realize, but one of my colleagues at Penn State had completed his PhD, his undergraduate at Cornell, and he came to me and said, you know, when he heard the news, and he said, wow, Cornell, it's the best kept secret. That was exactly what he said. It was as though it was this. He said it's a hidden, and then he went on to say it's a hidden jewel buried in the mountains, you know, of central New York. And I think back to that statement all the way back then, and it is remarkable what an incredible jewel that we have, and you all have made it that way. I'm proud to be with Mike celebrating this. I'm proud to be with you all. It's been such a fun run, a great run, and we will continue to be in touch even when I become a Virginia Tech Hokie. I got it right. There you go. So thank you all. Thanks for sharing this hour with me.
Thank you, Lance. Thank you so much. We will miss you tremendously. Thank you for all you've accomplished at Cornell. And I look forward to staying in touch and hearing of your accomplishments at Virginia Tech.
Okay,
Thank you, and thanks everyone for joining us.